Welcome to For the Record. I'm Lily Coleman. We are just one day away from an historic day in Pittsburgh's Catholic Diocese. Bishop Mark Eckman is set to be installed as the 13th bishop of the diocese. This coming just days after outgoing Bishop David Zubik held a Mass of Thanksgiving, giving thanks to the church and its members for allowing him to lead for 18 years. I sat down with both men to talk about the past and the future of the Catholic Church, starting with some reflections from Bishop Zubik. Take a look. Did you ever think 50 years ago when you were ordained that you would be at this point?
Never. You know, all I wanted to do, when I think about the day that I entered the seminary, all I ever wanted to do was to be a priest of the Church of Pittsburgh. Never imagining, you know, what God would have in mind. And so, but it's been a real gift, you know, and I look at that and say, I can't believe that you trusted me to do this and to do it for this length of time. So, you know, I'll be offering thanks to God for his call to me, but especially for being able to work with all of our priests and our people.
So, you know, you've been bishop since 2007. Talk about your years leading the church. What are your memories? What are your takeaways? What will you remember?
Yeah, I think the biggest part of it, it was really born out of the call, are you excited about your faith? Because I think that, you know, we knew that we were going to be faced with some reshaping. You know, when I became bishop of the diocese, we almost had almost 200 parishes, and we knew that that was going to have to change. But for the most important reason was to really bring people together, so they could be closer to Jesus, but that they could be closer to each other. I think about when I was growing up in Beaver County in Ambridge. You know, we had seven Catholic churches when I was growing up and 7 steel mills. And that was obviously a reflection of what happened with immigration that happened in the last century. Obviously, things have happened. People moved away from the river towns to other parts of the diocese. And so it was really important that we had to take a look at our resources and say, how can we really come closer together? So I think that's been the major focus of the 18 years, you know, especially over the course of the last 10. We really worked very hard to really bring our parishes together. You know, we now have 60 parishes. From my experience, I think that the parishes are a lot more alive than they were when we started the process. The most important part of all that, though, was let's see if our faith can be fired up. And I think our people have really come together to do that.
You mentioned your roots in Beaver County. Growing up in this region, what does that mean to then have had this opportunity to lead the Catholic Church of Pittsburgh? That has to have a special meaning, and I will probably ask you the same question coming up.
I think the blood of southwestern Pennsylvania flows through my veins. You know, every time that I go back to a parish in Beaver County, I'll thank them especially for having an important impact on my faith. And you know, one of the things that I've experienced is that we have 6 counties that are part of the Diocese of Pittsburgh. Each one of those counties has a different personality. But the bottom line that the common denominator of all of them is the whole spirit of welcome. You know, and one of the things that I really treasure about the people of our diocese is that they are who they are. Don't put on any airs. You know, talk about what's important, or family. You know, faith is really important. You know, work is a very important part of who we are. And so it's just kind of neat to be able to be in a community where people do not see putting on airs as an element of life, but rather just be who you are. And I think, you know, that's one of the neat things about it. And that was one of the things I loved also when I was bishop in Green Bay, because the people there were of the same mindset: family, faith, work. You know, so that was a beautiful part of it all.
18 years. A lot has changed in 18 years. Things look very different now than it did when you became bishop here in Pittsburgh. We're talking 2 popes. You know, what do you think has changed over the years? And you know, how do you hope that you have helped navigate through some of that change?
I think the secular culture has become much more predominant, I think, and it's become a great challenge, to speak through, what happens all the time on social communications and messages that go out that sometimes are inhumane, not to mention to be unchristian. And so it's a matter of trying to address the better part of who we are, to help people recognize that God has created us in his image and likeness. And we have to work hard individually, but we have to work hard together collectively to help what God has done for us, to show that, we need to work hard to make sure that the face of God really emanates from us. And that's a lot harder to do today than it was when I was growing up as a kid, as the 1950s. Mm-hmm. So it's a matter of trying to remind people of the goodness that God has created in us, and the beauty that he's created in the world in which we live.
It hasn't all been positive. There has been some tough times as well. I think of 2018, the grand jury report, then Attorney General Josh Shapiro, releasing that report. What do you remember from that moment? Because that was such a trying time for many Catholics, not just here locally, but around the world. Do you remember that as a point of sadness or an opportunity for change, or perhaps both?
Yeah, well, both. I think it was a moment of great tragedy, great sadness, to know that, some people of our numbers, committed crimes that really hurt other people deeply. That was a very difficult, and still is, because it's a matter of trying to heal, mm-hmm. Heal the wounds that are there, and at the same time to be able to build trust. And I hope that all the efforts that we put forward helped us to get through that very difficult time. But I hope that that trust continues to grow. I think it makes us all aware that our behavior can have a great impact on other people, and especially when it's bad behavior, it can really damage people. And we continue to try to do lots to really help folks to become healed.
Let's switch gears here, talk a little about the process of retiring. I was there when you announced that Pope Leo had accepted your resignation. Walk me through what that process looks like, because you had actually sent that letter to Pope Francis, correct?
Exactly, yeah.
Walk me through that process.
So in our Code of Canon Law, it's required that on our 75th birthday that we have to write a letter to the Holy Father. I prayed about that. I made a 30-day retreat, as a matter of fact, back in January of 2024. And really the main focus of it was, like, what should I put in that letter? Mm-hmm. And then second of all, how could I be prepared for the next chapter in my life? And it was one of the most sacred times in my life to be able to make that particular retreat. And what I wanted to do was to be prepared for whatever the Holy Father was going to respond to. When I wrote the letter, I basically said, I'm writing the letter because I have to. I've turned 75. I love being a priest. I love being a bishop, but I'm at your disposal. If you want me to stay on, I'm more than happy to stay on. If you want to accept my resignation, I'll gladly embrace it. And really, I consider myself to be blessed that, it was 9 months after I wrote that letter that the response came back. But I think that a lot of people will look at this and think that, like, somehow, because I'm beginning retirement, I'm no longer a bishop, and I'm no longer a priest. And I keep saying, no, everything stays the same except the headaches. And I have a good person here who's going to take the headaches. But, I have, lots of things that I put in motion that I'll be doing as I did when I was a newly ordained priest. Helping in our parishes, doing spiritual direction. I've already talked to Susan Rauscher, who's the executive director of our Catholic Charities, saying that I want to be a regular volunteer at Catholic Charities, maybe even once a week. I'm hoping to do some work at St. Vincent Seminary, which is in Latrobe. So I think I'm not going to be a couch potato. I can tell you that for sure.
Still ahead on For the Record, what incoming Bishop Mark Ekman has to say about his new appointment and what he sees for the future of the church. Welcome back to For the Record. As I continue my conversation with retiring Pittsburgh Bishop David Zubik and incoming Bishop Mark Ekman, I wanted to know what Ekman sees for the future of the Catholic Diocese. Take a look.
Something that you two share is you're both from this area. Walk me through your roots here in Pittsburgh.
Well, I'm from the South Hills as opposed to Beaver County. So St. Valentine was where I was baptized and celebrated all my sacraments. I was even assigned there for about a year and a half as a parochial vicar. My roots are at St. Valentine. I went to South Hills Catholic, which is now Seton LaSalle High School. When I entered here at the St. Paul Seminary, it was right after high school, and we attended classes at Duquesne, so once again a local school. And then I went to theology at St. Vincent and Latrobe, so not too far away for that either. And most of my parish assignments have been in the South Hills as well. I've had one up in the North Hills, and everybody wondered how I didn't get lost when I went there. But I can honestly say that throughout my priesthood, I used to visit all the churches. So I've been to every church, whether they're opened or closed, that we've had. So I know the diocese pretty well, all 6 counties. And as Bishop said, there's a different flavor in every county. But the people are the same everywhere. They're hardworking, they're friendly, they're just so happy that you're willing to share the faith with them. And so that's really what makes our diocese so strong, are the faithful.
How did you get the news that you would be bishop-elect?
Bishop and I were in a meeting, and my phone rang, and I had the nuncios in my contact list now. So when I saw that, I thought, oh my, because I sort of was expecting that I would be named an ordinary someplace. I didn't think it would be Pittsburgh. So I went across the hall so I could have a little quiet, and he said, I'm in the airport, I'm getting ready to go on a plane. Just wanted to let you know Pope Leo's appointed you as the Bishop of Pittsburgh. And I said, oh. And I said, does Bishop Zubik know? He goes, I'm going to call him next. I have to get on the plane. So that was it. He says, I'll call you tomorrow, which he did. He called Bishop Zubik and told him that the Holy Father accepted his resignation. And then the next day, the nuncio called to set up the announcement day and then the installation day. So it was a very quick call because he was flying from Kansas back to Washington.
You were expecting to move, but you didn't think Pittsburgh. Why didn't you think Pittsburgh?
Well, for the last 50 of the 55 years, we've had a Pittsburgher as the ordinary. And I just thought they probably want to get a fresh set of eyes in here, somebody that comes in with a different perspective, but shows what I know. I'm glad to be home because I don't have to pack, I don't have to get new doctors. It's good that way. I know the people, I know the parishes, so I don't have to get acclimated. So that'll be good. I can start running and don't have to worry about learning.
You don't have to learn new roads either. You're used to this traffic, right?
Yes, I know the shortcuts.
Still ahead.
And I think, he's steadying the ship as well, too, keeping us on course.
What these 2 bishops are saying about the new pope and what's expected as the Catholic Church enters a new era. Welcome back to For the Record. It's a new era in the Catholic Church, with Pittsburgh preparing for the installation mass for its new bishop tomorrow, as well as the recently installed Pope Leo. I speak with retiring Bishop David Zubik, as well as Mark Ekman, the man who will soon lead the Pittsburgh Diocese, about these changing times for the church.
Pope Leo, I mean, obviously that's a talking point for everyone, an American Pope. What does that mean? The first American Pope, if you will, what does that mean for the Catholic Church and all eyes kind of on Chicago? What are you hoping happens in the next couple of years with Pope Leo at the helm?
One of the things that I think is refreshing is that he's going to continue, obviously, the direction that Pope Francis gave to the Church, doing it a lot differently. But at the same time, there's not a radical change on the horizon for sure, and I think he's steadying the ship as well too, keeping us on course. I think he's only been in office just 2 months, and I think that he's sizing up the challenges that are there. He's already talking about the threats and the opportunities that we face with AI and the impact that that's going to have on the journey of faith. So, he's obviously a very intelligent guy, but one of the things that I see and appreciate in him is the same thing that I saw and appreciated in Pope Francis. His number one rule was to be a good pastor, to be a good shepherd. And I think he's showing that in beautiful ways.
In addition to that, he's very international. He might be from the United States. He certainly understands our culture and what constitutes the American personality. But he served as a missionary in Peru for all those years. And so his outlook is very much different than what a traditional American might be. He's used to working with the poor. He's used to helping to establish churches in poor and impoverished areas. So he brings that with him as well. He speaks several different languages fluently, so he understands the world in a way that perhaps others would not. And so I think that's going to be a benefit to the church as well.
What else do you guys want to touch on? What do you feel like I'm missing? Is there anything else you want to touch on or share?
I think that one of the things that's so important about the leadership of Pope Francis and now Pope Leo is recognizing how important it is for us to put ourselves in the shoes of the other person. One of the things that I really worry about, in our society today is that people hold their own truth as being the truth, and it doesn't matter what you believe or what's important to you. What matters is what's important for me. And I think that that threatens to have a negative impact on empathy. And I think that that was the message of Pope Francis, and it's already begun to be the message of Pope Leo, that we have got to put ourselves in the shoes of other people. We've got to know what they feel like. And I think that's at the heart of respecting human life as well, too. I think that's an issue that becomes a threat, as we see with the wars that are taking place in our world today, with the strong divisions between left and right. And that's not only in our country, it's in our church as well, too. And I think we do have to come back to what I said a little bit earlier about recognizing God's created us in his image and likeness. And it's really important for every single one of us to work to see how we can wear the face of God and bear his heart and his hands.
When For the Record returns in just 2 minutes, I have one final question about Bishop Zubik's legacy. Welcome back to For the Record. As we wrap up my sit-down interview with Pittsburgh Bishop David Zubik and the man who will be installed as his successor tomorrow, Bishop Mark Ekman, I asked them both about the legacy they think Bishop Zubik will leave as he enters retirement.
I have to ask, what do you hope your legacy is?
To do what I challenge the people to do when I raise the question, are you more excited about your faith? That's what I hope. Obviously, as I look at it, it's hard to be objective about that. But what I see is I think that we're heading in the right track. I think one of the main themes that we kept on repeating is to be on mission for the church alive, and but I hope that as the Lord's looking down, He's going to be the ultimate judge of it. He'll be able to see whether or not that's genuine, whether or not it's true.
Bishop Ekman, as the soon-to-be installed bishop, what do you think his legacy is, and what will you take away from his time?
Well, I agree that building a church alive, and we had a prayer that all of our parishes prayed as we were preparing for the mergers that took place. And part of that prayer said that we were praying for vibrant parishes. And combining the parishes together, the former parishes, to make the new entities, I think that's exactly what's happening. More people are gathered for worship, that makes a better spirit. The ministries are more vibrant, there's more activity happening. So I really think that's, Bishop's legacy. It was a very difficult decision going from 188 parishes to 60. But what we're seeing now, that the dust is starting to settle, is a lot of fruit. People are doing works of ministry. Their worship is much more prayerful. So I really think that's Bishop Zubik's legacy, is that he has really set into motion a faith that is alive, and a faith that people are embracing and trying to the best of their ability to live out.
I did have one more thing that I wanted to say. So, it was May 27th was the day that we both got our calls, and we were both sitting next to each other. And actually, when Bishop Mark went to receive the call, the meeting came to a break, and then I went over and got the news that was accepted. And one of the things that happens is you're not allowed to tell anybody what the news is. You had to be quiet. So when I came back after mine, the meeting had already reorganized, and all that I did was I just grabbed his hand real strong, just to make sure that he knew, that I knew, and that grasping his hand was a sign that I want to be his number one cheerleader, as he takes over leading the Church of Pittsburgh. So I'm out to do my duty to make sure that happens.
Pittsburgh's Action News 4 will be there for tomorrow's installation mass. It's set to happen at 2:30 p.m. at St. Paul Cathedral in Oakland. Look for coverage beginning on Pittsburgh's Action News 4 at 4 p.m. Meanwhile, if you have a topic you'd like us to address on For the Record, send us an email to news@wtae.com. You can also rewatch this episode or any episode with the Very Local app on your smartphone, tablet, or smart TV. Thank you for joining us. Have a good week.